This program is brought to you by the following sponsors.
Hey, what is going on, guys? Jay Shah here with another video, and today's video is I kind of wanted to have this kind of discussion video about, my kind of like the steps I'm taking into finishing up this project that I've put myself on for the past, I don't know, since 2014 is when I started it, and I just decided to really push it forward into putting it out there on the internet. So, what you guys are seeing is the illustration that I did traditionally for the cover to the first volume of my manga project, Juvidora. AKA, if you want to say it for short, it's Judu. As you can see, this is I'm not really good at coloring, so I decided to try my hand at coloring. But this video was more or less about how I'm using, I guess, traditional manga that I'm reading now, as well as Persona 3 to actually write pacing in my manga. Because my manga isn't a shonen. If you guys don't know what a shonen is a manga that is kind of catered to, I would say, to the demographic of teenage or young boys. My book isn't a shonen. It's more of a I guess, I wouldn't say it's a seinen either. It's kind of bridging the gaps between a shonen and a seinen. A seinen is a book that's catered to the age demographic of young men to like older men. And my story is bridging the gap of that, sort of. Because what I'm doing is I'm taking characters that look very cartoony, very Gorillaz-esque like, or just 2D really, because I'm taking the idea of 2D's eyes and putting it on like almost every character that I draw. I'm taking cartoonish looking characters and putting them in a real world looking setting, because most of the backgrounds that I'm illustrating look realistic, and I'm bridging that kind of gap, but I'm using manga as well as Persona 3 to like help me with my pacing in terms of writing, because I noticed the way I write very slowly. And when I say that, I mean there isn't a lot happening. Like if I read it back to myself, I'm kind of like, oh, why is this here? And a lot of times, I think if you're writing intellectual property that's yours and a story, you have to make it interesting. But my thing is, I've always felt that I struggled with developing characters. One of the things that I did was I did my book Hours, and what I decided to do was write Hours to see if I could make, I guess, my readers fall in love with characters in the span of just 20 pages. That's why I wrote Hours. I just wanted to see if I could develop the character enough to the point where people, oh, I really like this character. He or she is very interesting. That was one of the reasons why I kind of wrote the little girl at the end of the second half of Hours. A lot of people said they fell in love with her by the time they reached the scene where there's her talking to the main character in a car. Everyone kind of fell in love with her at that point, and that was my goal. My goal was to see if I could develop characters in a short of amount of time. Now that I'm writing a manga, I have pretty much infinite amount of pages that I can develop these characters. But one of the things that I ran into yesterday was I was reading a part of Judo back to myself that I know in a couple of pages I'm gonna have to illustrate, and I asked myself a very, very tough question, and that tough question was, why is this here? If you are writing anything or you're illustrating anything, if you're telling a story, you should always ask yourself that question. Why is this here? What purpose does it serve? I noticed that in the second chapter of Juvidora, that I had wrote this kind of long, drawn out segment where the characters are kind of talking. And the problem that I noticed that I had is that this talking and walking segment lasted for like 10 pages. And I was like, why is this here? You know, I just had to ask myself, like, would I want to read this if it was me? And then I thought to myself, I probably would get bored. So I had to, so what I did was I took 5 of those pages and I read it back to myself, and I was like, okay, so this part doesn't need to be here. I can remove it. Because it was one of the characters explaining something that you're eventually gonna see anyway. So I was like, yeah, so this doesn't really need to be here. So I took those 5 pages and I kind of wrote something that the character explains. I wrote it in visually. So it's not the character telling you that they do this specific thing. It's me showing you that it happens and that one of the characters reacts to it. And after that, there is like kind of like a, oh, I get it moment. That's the type of person that this character is. And this is how, you know, all the other characters react to it. I really had to think about that. I was like, okay, the way I wrote it now is so much better. It wasn't a lot of things, but it was one of those perfect segments of show, don't tell kind of things. And it's a good thing that I read it back to myself before I drew it, because if I would have drawn it, I would have been like, this doesn't feel right. I'm going to erase all this now and I'm going to do it another way. So it's a good thing that I wrote it all in before I got to a chance to, you know, really get to the part where I'm drawing it in. But that advice is probably some of the best advice you can ever give yourself, is sometimes you should really show, don't tell. Don't like, a lot of times is you don't want to put like captions and then like these long paragraphs where people are reading something that happened. Show it to the reader. Sometimes you can do it in a creative way where it's more interesting that way. And one of the ways that I realized I really need to go back and do this is I actually went back and I read some of my manga and I was like, okay, I see how this artist did it. And then I popped in Persona 3 and I played a little bit of not Shin Megami Tensei. Yeah, it was Shin Megami Tensei. I popped in a little bit of Nocturne, started playing it, and then I noticed the way they pace things. Like let's take for example the event that happens in the beginning of Nocturne. They could have easily just had you wake up as Demi-Fiend and nothing happens, and you know that is you telling the story and be like, oh, you know, this great calamity happened years ago. And it was like, no, what they did was they showed it to you. They had you play it. You start off with the kid, you're going to the hospital to see your teacher, and the expansion happens. And is that what it's called? I don't remember what it's called. But the big light in the sky happens and it destroys the world. And then you wake up as the Demi-Fiend because of the parasite that you ingested, the Magatama. So Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne did it in a very good way. Another thing is with Persona 3, the way they pace the beginning of the game, where you play as the protagonist and you're going to the house and then you see all the caskets and stuff and you can't really explain things. They showed and didn't tell you, instead of you just having, you know, the character wake up in the hotel and him remembering that he signed a contract and all this stuff and yada yada yada. So I really had to, you know, go back to, like, I guess my anime roots, or, you know, my manga roots, and because manga is new to me, you have to remember that. And writing a manga, it feels vastly different almost to writing a traditional American comic. I mean, when I write comics, Americanized comics, my thought process is totally different. And when I'm writing this new project that I'm doing now, it's like the other side of a coin for me, because I'm taking into account what a lot of mangas do now. A lot of manga that I noticed doesn't really happen in American style comics is it feels like you're almost riding a wave almost when you're reading manga. In traditional comics, it's kind of like, here's the low point, here's some action, and then the stakes get higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, sort of kind of thing. It's almost like climbing up a mountain. Then when you read a manga is like, here, let's start off really high. Let's start off really high, and then you end off kind of low, but then like something catches you and it's like, oh, we're going back really high now. We're going back really high, and it's like, oh god, this roller coaster is like uncontrollable. It's kind of like that for me. And the thing is that while I'm writing Juvidora, I'm trying to kind of visualize this wave that I want to go into. And a lot of times it's hard because I've written American comics for so long. So I kind of find myself, doing something. I'm like, wait, I can kind of do it like this, and all these things. There's a lot of, cerebral thinking involved in this writing mangas thing, because it's my first time and writing and illustrating a manga, because I want it to be good, but I know it's gonna suck and it's gonna have plot holes. So I hope it doesn't, because it's such a simple story. I hope it doesn't have plot holes, but fans always figure things out. Like, they'll always ask you a question like, well, why didn't this happen instead of this? Because you remember this thing you wrote in chapter 1 back in volume 15, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, I'll get right on that. One of those moments. But anyway, I don't want to ramble. Just wanted to make this video for you guys, and I appreciate you guys for supporting me into this venture that I'm doing. The goal is to illustrate Juvidora full-time and put it on Webtoon so you guys can read it episodically. So I will be releasing it episodically, I've decided, and we can talk about that next time, of course. But anyway, guys, that is it for this discussion video. Just wanted to fill you in, and I will see you guys next time. Peace. I hope you guys like the cover. I'm probably gonna change that green for sure.